Blade Runner 2049, Denis Villeneuve's long-awaited sequel to Ridley Scott's masterpiece, Blade Runner, has opened to rave reviews across the board with an 89% fresh rating on the reviews aggregator Rotten Tomatoes. Critics have called it mesmerizing to behold, a film that is spectacular enough to win over new generations of viewers, yet the rare sequel that truly merits its existence. Although the film's themes can be appreciated by a newcomer, many will wish to watch the original either for the first time or as a refresher before feasting upon the sequel. However, with multiple versions of Blade Runner available, this isn't as easy a proposition as it would first seem. Welcome to Final Frontier. So which version of Blade Runner should you see before watching its sequel? There are 8 versions of the 1982 cult hit film, including a nearly 4-hour-long early cut shown only to studio personnel. These versions include 2 different director's cuts and several different endings. For those new to the film, the short answer to the question is, watch the final cut. This is Ridley Scott's definitive vision of the film, one in which he had complete control, and it was also mentioned by Denis Villeneuve as one of the versions he was inspired by, although he admitted that the original US theatrical release was the version he first saw and fell in love with. So what are the other versions of Blade Runner? The work print version was shown to audiences as test previews in the US in March 1982. Negative responses to these previews resulted in the studio making various modifications for its subsequent US theatrical release. This version did not have an opening title sequence and crawl explaining the backstory of the replicants, but instead opened with a definition for replicants describing them as synthetic humans with paraphysical capabilities having skin, flesh culture. There was also no unicorn daydream sequence, which would be a key addition to the director's cut and the final cut. There is also a different shot of the ending as Deckard watches Roy Batty die with alternate narration.
I watched him die all night. It was a long, slow thing, and he fought it all the way. He never whimpered, and he never quit. He took all the time he had as though he loved life very much. Every second of it, even the pain. Then he was dead.
There is also no happy ending. The film ends when the lift doors close as Deckard and Rachel leave. The work print version would inadvertently be released in 1990 and 91, marketed as a director's cut without the approval of director Ridley Scott. A San Diego sneak preview was shown only once in May 1982. This version was nearly identical to the 1982 US theatrical version, except that it included 3 additional scenes not shown before or since. The US theatrical version, known as the original version or domestic cut, added a voiceover narrative by Harrison Ford after test audience members indicated difficulties in understanding the film, making this cut feel more like a neo-noir detective film. The studio also added a happy ending, with an additional scene showing Deckard and Rachel happily driving away from Los Angeles.
Gaff had been there and let her live. 4 years, he figured. He was wrong. Tyrell had told me Rachel was special. No termination date.
Perhaps more importantly, the original theatrical release had no unicorn dream sequence, thus never calling into question whether Deckard is human or a replicant. The international cut, also known as the Criterion edition or uncut version, is similar to the US theatrical release, but has more violence in 3 specific scenes, which were later inserted into the final cut. The US broadcast version was the US theatrical version edited by television company CBS to tone down violence, profanity and nudity to meet broadcasting restrictions. This version is preceded by a teaser explaining that Deckard is not a replicant, and the initial text scroll at the start of the film is read by an anonymous announcer with slightly different text. Following the discovery of a 70mm work print version of Blade Runner, Warner Bros. Decided to market this as a director's cut of Blade Runner across America. However, Ridley Scott publicly disowned this version of the film as a director's cut, citing its rough editing, lack of a key scene, and the climax not featuring the score composed for the film by Vangelis. Warner Bros. Eventually pulled theatrical screenings of the work print version, but, noting the resurgent cult popularity of the film, decided to assemble a definitive director's cut with supervision from Scott for an official theatrical re-release in 1992. 4 major changes were made to the original theatrical cut. the removal of Deckard's 13 explanatory voiceovers, the insertion of a dream sequence of a unicorn running through a forest which would suddenly call into question whether Deckard is human, the addition of a taunting question by Gaff to Deckard as replicant Roy dies, "But are you sure you are a man?" This addition is not in any of the other cuts, including the final cut, the removal of the studio-imposed happy ending. However, due to alternative commitments, time and money constraints, Scott was not directly in charge of the director's cut, and he was not entirely comfortable with this version as his definitive director's cut. Ridley Scott's final cut, or the 25th anniversary edition, is the only version over which the director had complete artistic control. This cut was completely restored from the original negative and digitally remastered. The final cut contains a longer version of the Unicorn Dream, which had never been in any other version. Additionally, all of the extra violence and alternate edits from the international cut were inserted. The film would also remove the happy ending, thus leaving the fate of Deckard and Rachel ambiguous, as was always intended. For more videos on all things science fiction, please subscribe. If you want some sneak peeks of upcoming videos and a little bit of personal stuff from me, then join me on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching.